Hello everyone, and welcome to Creating a Basic Accessible Word Document. My name is James Herndon, and I am an accessibility consultant at a company called Equal Entry. We do trainings like this, and we also do audits for accessibility on site systems, apps, VR games, and so on. And we do a lot of different work around trying to help people understand core concepts of accessibility and how, building on the core concepts, you can get most of the way there in terms of your accessibility goals. It's much less complicated than many folks would imagine, and I hope today's course helps to reinforce that idea. What we're going to look at today, I'll give you a quick overview of who this course is really for and what my goals are going to be, but most of our time is going to be spent talking about various aspects of accessibility in Microsoft Word, and I'll be showing you some accessibility remediations with real documents. We're going to start with document metadata and formatting. Then we'll go into headings, non-text elements, data tables, links, lists, and then we'll run the accessibility checker and export to a PDF. These are, in the course, actual Montgomery County materials you may have already seen on your site system. At the end, we'll sum things up with some key takeaways, some resources. If you want to explore some of this tech yourself or look into the accessibility guide that's already available to you as county employees. And after today's session, if you think of something and say, I think this might be a bizarre special case, I don't know how to get an answer from that in a video training, reach out to Chris Daniels and he'll pass on that question along to us and we'll make sure we get your question answered for you. And there's also been a course for PDF training, and that will follow this one and should be available to you in the same library from which you obtained this training. And overall, we're just going to get into what are some things you might have to do in Word or in Acrobat to bring things up to ostensibly 100% in terms of meeting the WCAG 2.1 level AA success criteria, especially in circumstances where you don't have access to the source document that was used to create the PDF. And this is going to apply to all Microsoft Office apps, and those other apps have these same tools. Now, who is this for? In other courses, we may have catered things toward not just contributors and site administrators, but also their developers. This specific course, I would say, is going to be geared more toward contributors, those of you who are making updates not just to the web, but writing content for PDFs or Word documents, and also those of you who do system admin work. And the reason for that is, from the contributor perspective, a content writer, that should be self-explanatory, right? If you're working in Word and PDFs, you want to make sure that everything you distribute is readable by anyone who might get it, and that includes people who use assistive tech. And for system admins, you may have it in your power to set certain parameters around what type of content can be uploaded or not. And perhaps you want to require documents to be accessible before they can be uploaded. You want an accessibility report that can be generated when someone runs an accessibility check. You want that to be a part of your process. Or you just want some different kinds of rules around whatever it might need to be for you. You want to make sure that anything that is going into your site system is appropriately accessible for Word documents, and you could potentially set some ground rules on that. What we're going to cover again today, in addition to the demos that I mentioned, that's the broad practical goal, but in terms of maybe some questions that we can be thinking about as we go through this. The first is, how can we make our PDF source documents as accessible as possible? What can we do in Microsoft Word to ensure that when we export to an Acrobat PDF document, those documents are maximally accessible. They are as accessible as we can get them to that point. We don't look back at them and say, oh, my source document, I should have done X, Y, or Z. There may still be remediations that we need to do, and we'll talk about those as time goes on. But really there's a lot, and I would say most of the work that we can do can happen in that source document. And that brings us to our second learning objective. What native formatting tools are available in Word and how do they affect accessibility? So any of you who have used Word have seen the giant, some might say quite cluttered toolbars at the top of Word that offer you dozens of features and options for document formatting. We're going to look at some of those and show how they can create accessibility in a document and allow you to make programmatic adjustments that will translate to the appropriate PDF tag when the document is exported, and ensure that somebody who's using assistive tech on a PDF has the best possible chance of understanding that content. Because rather than styling things visually in the Word document, and just making it look a certain way, you are using the proper settings and formatting within the tools that are already offered to you in Word, and how you use those will dictate how accessible the PDF is, because PDFs will rely on those programmatic settings. And then finally, how does the accessibility checker work, and can we trust it? You can guess maybe on that secondary question that there's going to be some doubts there, but it's going to do a lot of work for you, so definitely make use of it, and I'll show you a demo of that later, of course. A natural question some of you might have is, why is this class focused on Microsoft Word? I thought this was going to be about PDF accessibility. So to reiterate what I was saying before about the source document making a huge difference, the inverse of that is if your source document is very bad in terms of accessibility, then of course your PDF will be too. Bad input equals bad output. Second is that, as I hinted at before, the Office Accessibility Checker is not 100% reliable. There are things that it can get wrong, just like the spelling and grammar checker, but that is no reason to avoid running either one. The Accessibility Checker can do a lot of work for you and can often direct you to the specific spots that need to change, or even suggest what can be changed, and it has made the process of remediation quite user-friendly, and I hope that becomes apparent by the end of this training. The last reason is I know that Microsoft Word is fairly popular at Montgomery County and everywhere else, of course, and that's all the more reason to become familiar with using it. And I want to say here that this process that I use and the version of Microsoft Word that I use, this is what's known as the thick client or the big client. The default client that you might have through the county may not have all of these integrated features or may not have all of these options for accessibility remediation. But the thick version of Office Government specifically is available too. You just need to download that, and I'm sure Chris and others on his team can give you a hand if you have trouble finding or accessing or installing that, and that will get you what you need. So I want to mention that because if you see me make some of these changes and then you go to do it yourself and you think, well, wait, I don't see it here, it may just be because you don't have the thick client for Office Government. So as long as you download and install that, you should be able to do everything that I show you today. So we're going to start out with document metadata. Metadata is very important for users of assistive technology. It's the kind of thing where sighted users may not see what you're doing with metadata because you are essentially making changes to the information about the information being your document, right? When you're adding a title and an author attribute, someone can go into the info and see that, but most people probably aren't going to do that. However, if someone is using assistive technology, when they open up a document, probably the first thing it's going to do, especially if it's a screen reader, is tell them the title of that document. So you want to set a title, and usually you want your title to match the first heading in your document. There is an author setting. That's not a requirement, but as a best practice, I do recommend adding or updating that field as needed, just so people know if a document belongs to a specific person or a particular department. And another thing you want to do as well when you're trying to format a document, and I'll show you a demo of all this in a moment, is be careful not to use the Enter key to create spaces between paragraphs too much. It's not an accessibility violation, but I would say as a best practice, try to use the paragraph spacing menu that you have up top where you can highlight text and select, for example, add a space after a paragraph or before a paragraph, and create those gaps programmatically. You may have noticed that in some Word documents, When you go to click in one of those spaces between paragraphs, you can't put your cursor in there, and that's because it's not a carriage return blank in there. It's because somebody has set the paragraph structures to add a space after or before other paragraphs. And the reason you want to do that is each of these pilcrow, that's what this backwards double-lined P is called. Each of these pilcrow characters gets exported to the PDF as a paragraph tag. So when somebody's tabbing through the PDF, what they might get is blank, blank, title of document, blank, blank. And again, they can still get the information they need, but having it be periodically interrupted with blank, blank is not very user-friendly. So again, not an accessibility violation, just something you should be mindful of. You don't need to do this for every paragraph in every document you have. I'm just going to show you in the demo how a document can look exactly the same if you don't create all the blank spaces using the Enter key. And you can carry that knowledge going forward as you make new documents. So now I'm going to show you a brief video about document metadata and formatting with respect to accessibility.
I want to verify that a title has been set on this document. I go up to File, then I go to Info. Right over here, you can see the document does have a title, Leap for MCG Leveraging Employment Abilities Program. To check the document formatting, I'll navigate to the paragraph menu and select the Pilcrow button. After doing so, I can look at the document and say, oh, I have all these blank spaces from using the Enter key for line breaks, and maybe I don't need all of them. Let me check my line spacing format. Above the first heading, if I delete the Pilcrow and use the Add Space Before Paragraph feature, then I can achieve the same layout without adding artifacts to the document. Farther down, before the bulleted list, I could use the Add Space After Paragraph feature and remove this extra space. I will do so. The document looks the same as it did before, but we've removed that unnecessary pause for people who use assistive tech. I finished making edits, so now I can turn the Pilcrow back off. After making these fixes, my screen reader is not going to say blank when it reaches one of these areas. It'll just go directly to the next line. Proper use of document metadata and formatting can make your documents much more accessible for people who use screen readers.
So let's move on to headings. How can we make it easier for people with disabilities to navigate a document with headings? We can make it easier for them to do so because headings allow screen reader users to jump around quickly. If you're a sighted person, you probably take it for granted that you can look for the big bold text in a document and jump visually from big bold text to big bold text and so on, and figure out where you need to be in a document. And you can also use the navigation pane. If someone has already set headings, somebody who is blind, for example, can use the navigation pane to jump between them. But if no headings have been set in the document, then that person will need to go through the document all the way from beginning to end, potentially, to find the information they want, unless they want to do a Control F to try to find some keyword. But they may not know exactly what they're looking for, and there may be other information in there that they would like to reach, and it wouldn't occur to them to search for it, and so on. So as an accessibility rule, we definitely want to include headings in our documents to provide that equivalent experience. Let me show you a brief video about headings.
There is a simple way to confirm that your document has programmatic headings. Go to the View tab, and then in the Show menu, select Navigation Pane. Notice how it is empty. If I open the navigation pane and there is nothing inside it, that tells me that there are no headings in the document. Let's add some headings. I'm going to highlight the first heading, Leap for MCG, Leveraging Employment Abilities Program. In the Home tab, I can navigate to the Styles menu and locate the option called Heading 1. If I mouse hover over the Heading 1 option, then I can see what the default formatting would look like if I selected Heading 1 right now. However, I want to use the formatting I already have. So I will right-click on Heading 1 and select Update Heading 1 to match selection. Voila! A new Level 1 heading appears in the navigation pane. For my first Level 2 heading, What is Leap for MCG?, I will follow the same process. I will highlight the appropriate text, locate Heading 2 in the Styles menu, right-click on it, and select Update Heading 2 to match selection. For the remaining Level 2 headings in the document, I can simply highlight them and select Heading 2, because I have already set the style to match what is LEAP for MCG. After following this process for all of the headings in my document, I can use the navigation pane to navigate between each of the document's headings. My document is now more accessible to a wider variety of people.
Now we're moving on to non-text elements. This is obviously a very common area of accessibility because people like their documents to be very visually oriented. Lots of pictures, lots of design icons, and so on. And then the trick is, how do we make images accessible to people who are blind or low vision? And the simplest way to do that is either to add a text alternative via the alt text menu, which I'll show you in a moment, or if an image is decorative, if it's just there for show, like a watermark, for example, it doesn't need to be communicated because it's not providing essential information. And if that's the case, then we can just mark it as decorative in that same alt text menu. And what that'll do is it will ensure that screen readers skip it, and it won't be this mysterious piece of content. I do want to take a moment to say not to use the auto-generated text alternatives that Office sometimes likes to show off that it can do. It is pretty cool that AI can now make some reasonably educated guesses about things that are in pictures, but if you've ever looked at some examples of what the AI comes up with, maybe you marvel that it got, oh, it's a picture of 10 different animals, and it noticed that one of them was a turtle. That's cool, but saying lots of things in a picture, turtle, that's not going to be something that communicates the image very clearly. So the AI is cool, but it's unreliable, and I don't recommend using it. I'd recommend just writing your own. And as I mentioned before, you just want to make sure you're using the thick Office client in order to get this option to mark images as decorative. Now, decorative. What am I talking about when I say something is decorative and whether or not it needs to be described in alt text or not? That is usually quite simple. There are some cases where people aren't quite sure what to do, but usually when you see something, you know right away that it's decorative. It's a line separator or so on. But there is a good example in the MCG guide. It's a demo with flags. This is available to you on your intranet. And then there's also what's called an alt decision tree by the W3C. And they have provided this rubric you can follow in order to determine whether or not the type of image you have needs to be described based on what it's being used for. But in most cases, it won't be a mystery to you. If you're showing a picture of a place or people or something that is clearly communicating something visually other than just style, then you'd want to give an alt text element for that. It needs a description, a text alternative, and I'll show you a way to do that. Here's an illustration of what I'm talking about.
In a Word document, images and other non-text elements need to be accessible to people who use screen readers. To make an image accessible, we use something called a text alternative, which is also known as alt text. To add a text alternative, right-click on an image and select View Alt Text. The Alt Text panel will appear. For this image, a text alternative has already been set, LEAP 4 MCG Leveraging Employment Abilities Program. However, this text alternative poses a problem. Because it is identical to the heading that precedes it, screen reader users will experience something called a stutter effect. Here's what it sounds like.
LEAP for MCG, Leveraging Employment Abilities Program. Graphic selected LEAP for MCG, Leveraging Employment Abilities Program.
To avoid a stutter effect, we are going to check Mark as Decorative. This will ensure that screen readers skip the image when reading the document. There is nothing essential in the image that is not already provided in the adjacent text, so it can be considered decorative. We can also check for text alternatives on our images by running the accessibility checker. To run the checker, open the Review tab and select Check Accessibility. The Accessibility Assistant panel will appear. If any images are missing alt text, this will be indicated under Media and Illustrations. In this document, 4 images are missing alt text. I will select the results and remediate my document. The first image, highlighted by the checker, is a decorative border at the bottom of page 2. I will select Mark as decorative. The second image, highlighted by the checker, is a decorative border at the top of page 1. Once again, I will select Mark as decorative. The third image is the decorative border at the bottom of page 1. I will mark it as decorative. The final image highlighted by the checker is the county seal. This needs a text alternative. In the text field labeled Enter Image Description, I will add Seal of Montgomery County, Maryland, 1776. I will press the Save button. All of the non-text elements in this document are now accessible.
Data tables. The thing you do when you are remediating a table for accessibility is to use the Table Properties menu in Word. The most important thing to do is to make sure that you add a header row. If you're using some of the templates that are available in Word, I believe just about all of those have headers already built into them. And so if you're trying to make your tables more accessible, choosing one of the pre-existing table templates in Word is a great way to go. You just want to make sure you don't allow a row to break across pages, and you can add a title and description if need be. Layout tables I do recommend avoiding. If any of you have ever worked in layout tabling on the web where sometimes things get styled as a table, even though the cells of that table are not meant to communicate information with respect to rows and columns the way a traditional data table would. It's just, a style. Tables in HTML, you have the option to use a role attribute of presentation, and that tells assistive technology that it doesn't need to announce the respective column header for each data cell. In Word, you don't have that ability, so I don't recommend using layout tables just for style reasons to lay out text a certain way. To me, this is another great example of why HTML is often a better format for accessibility than Word or PDF because it's quicker and easier to update, and it has been much more thoroughly vetted for accessibility. But also, there are a much greater variety of tools available to you to make things accessible. And as a content creator and manager, making things accessible on the web is much simpler than trying to maintain a library of accessible PDFs, which some of you may already know is extremely difficult. So let's look at a demonstration.
Microsoft Word has a built-in tool for making tables in your documents. While this tool is very useful, you might need to make a few extra adjustments in order for your tables to be accessible. Let's look at an example. I have just opened a document from the Department of Emergency Management and Homeland Security. In the document, there is a data table called Medications. I want to ensure that this table is accessible. Notice how this table has been formatted in such a way that the title takes up an entire row all by itself. The accessibility checker in Word might flag this as a regularity issue, because each row should have the same number of cells. We can remediate this issue by removing the top row and putting the title on the page instead. There are a few more adjustments I need to make. First, I need to turn the top row into a header row. This will ensure screen reader users understand what column a given cell is located in. To make this adjustment, I will highlight the top row. I will then right-click on the table and select Table Properties from the context menu. I open the Row tab and select Repeat as Header Row at the top of each page. Next, I will deselect Allow Row to break across pages. This ensures that people who use screen readers will not miss any information when they navigate to a given table cell. Finally, I will open the Alt Text tab where we can set a title and description. Because this table's title, Medications, is already on the page, we don't need to set a programmatic title. However, we will go ahead and add a description for ease of use. In the description field, I will enter the following. The medications table provides a list of the patient's medical problems and their associated medications, dosage, and frequency. Now that we have made some remediations, let's hear what it sounds like when I navigate the table using my screen reader.
Medical problem column 1. Medication column 2. Dosage column 3. Frequency column 4.
The table is accessible.
Links. How do we make links accessible? Links are one of those things that are so common, we would imagine that accessibility is also common potentially, but like images and non-text elements, which are also commonly used, there are some pretty common accessibility issues that occur too. The most common one I have seen is what we call the click here problem. That is where a list of links is presented as click here, click here, click here, where in a given document it might say, to see what's on our blog, click here. To look for career opportunities, click here. What happens is on the computer, if somebody is navigating a document like that and they use what's called a links list and pull it up to tell them what type of content is available on the site by type, such as links, then the list of links will say, click here, click here, click here. Now in Word, it's interesting. The keyboard command, at least for NVDA, the keyboard command to pull up a links list by default is caps lock F7, and that is also very close to the keyboard command to open the editor pane in Word, which is F7. And NVDA and Word can sometimes get confused about what you're trying to do when you press that command. So for some screen readers, you may not even be able to pull up a links list in Word. But even if you can't pull up a links list, having clear, unique link titles is still a best practice, because even if somebody isn't going to encounter those links as a list of click here, click here, click here, they do need to know, based on the hyperlink text, where a given link is going to take them. The text that you use in this Edit Hyperlink menu should tell them something about the purpose of the link and what differentiates it from the other links in your document. And that will certainly make it easier. So let's look at an example.
When we are adding links to a Word document, it's best to avoid simply pasting long URLs. Here's an example. Listen to what this link sounds like when I put focus on it with my screen reader.
Link https://www.montgomerycounty.gov/hr/recruitment/mcgcareers.html.
That's quite a mouthful. Not only is it difficult to understand, it doesn't tell us anything about the link's destination. Here's a better approach. I'm going to highlight the name of the website, Work for MCG. I will then press Ctrl-K to open the Insert Hyperlink menu. In the address field, I will paste the long URL from the document and then press Enter. The text Work for MCG is now an active link. I can delete the long URL because it is now redundant. Let's listen to what happens when I put focus on my new link with a screen reader.
Link Work for MCG.
That was much easier to understand. By using link titles instead of long URLs, we can make our Word documents more accessible.
So now we're going to talk about lists. Lists are similar to links in that they show up in a lot of places and documents, but they are a little bit different in that the most common issue isn't so much that they're all done the same way so that they can be confused with each other. The most common issue that happens is somebody comes up with a cool symbol for a bullet that they want to use instead of a traditional, boring, programmatic bullet like we have here. They want to just make the document look more interesting. And that, unfortunately, is not going to help Word export the rather complicated tagging system that lists have into a PDF. You want lists in a PDF to have, and I'll go into this in more detail in the PDF training next month, but lists have an L tag, and that L tag contains LI tags, which represent the list item elements. And then within the LI tags, there are LDL tags, which represent the bullet symbols, and L body tags for the text itself. You don't need to remember any of those names. What you need to take away here is, oh, that's pretty complicated, and somebody would have to do all of that manually in a PDF. Unless somebody just uses the bullet library here from the bullet drop-down menu for an unordered list, of course. If you're doing an ordered list with numbers or letters, you want to make sure that you just use that same tool up here in Word. So let's look at a demonstration.
When we create a list in a Word document, it's important to use the built-in tools that Word has. Otherwise, a list might not be accessible. Let's look at an example. First, I have a list with 2 bullets. Notice how these bullets are actually cartoon suns that have been inserted from the Symbols menu. Let's hear what this list sounds like when I access it with a screen reader.
Symbol 263C. Applicants must be certified.
I'm not told that this is a list. Also, I have no idea what symbol 263C means. Let's try using the built-in tools. First, I'll delete those cartoon sun symbols. Second, I'll highlight the text I want to turn into a list. Third, I'll navigate to the Paragraph menu in the Home tab and select the Bulleted List menu. Word creates a programmatic list for me. Let's listen to the updated list with my screen reader.
List with 2 items. Bullet applicants must be certified.
The term bullets is much easier to understand than symbol 263C. Plus, this is now a programmatic list, which means that if I export this document as a PDF, it will create list tags for screen reader users.
So now, finally, running the accessibility checker and exporting to PDF. You got a quick preview of the checker in the non-text elements part of this training, but the accessibility checker breaks potential violations into 4 categories. You have errors, which are the must-fix things like an image is missing alternative text. You're going to have warnings like hard-to-read text contrast. You'll have tips like there's no headings in this document. And then intelligent services, which are suggested things like, what if you use this AI-generated alt text? You don't want to do that, so intelligent services are less important than the others, especially errors and warnings. So one thing to keep in mind is, as I mentioned earlier, exporting the PDF doesn't mean that you're done. You don't want to totally trust the word checker. Sometimes the title doesn't come through to PDF, right? You might need to make a manual adjustment and tell Adobe to announce the title first rather than the file name, depending on your system settings for Adobe Reader or Adobe Acrobat. By default, it might try to announce the name of the file rather than the metadata associated with it, like that title that I set earlier in this training. So that's just an example of the kind of thing that you can't always rely on the word accessibility checker to take care of for you. And another one is that language settings might not totally get preserved properly, and tables might not export properly. I'll get into that a little bit more when we look at advanced remediation in a PDF. But for now, just know that the checker in Word, which I'll show you in a minute, can do a lot. But again, it won't guarantee you 100% accessibility. You'll have to look at the PDF for that. So let's look at how to run the checker.
I want to save this Word document as a PDF. Before I do so, I need to run Word's built-in accessibility checker. If there are accessibility issues in this document, then they will be much easier to fix here in my source document than in a PDF. To run the checker, I'll open the Review tab and select Check Accessibility. The checker says that my document looks good and no issues were found. I'm ready to export to PDF. To do so, I'll open the File tab and select Export. My installation of Word is integrated with Adobe Acrobat, and that's why I have an option to select Create Adobe PDF. If you don't see this option, there's no need to worry. You can still export a PDF by selecting Create PDF/XPS document and then Create PDF/XPS. Set a file destination for your PDF and select Publish. The PDF file will be created. For complex documents, you might need to make additional accessibility remediations in Adobe Acrobat.
So what are some key takeaways here? The first one I would mention is to use Microsoft Word and its native tools, as I mentioned, to make your PDF source document as accessible as possible. Don't just try to style things visually. Just make sure that you use all of those tools in the toolbar that I showed you. Metadata matters. Include it. Just because it's not on screen in the document doesn't mean it isn't worthwhile to include information like title and author, because it makes things much simpler for people using assistive tech. All the structural formatting tools in Word, like the default bullets rather than a cool little star symbol for a bullet, make sure you use those structural formatting tools that are already a part of Word. And then, as I just showed you, don't rely on the accessibility checker in Word as the final judge. You'll need to check the PDF too. There are still things that can go wrong, and we'll get into those in a little more detail in the PDF training. For further resources, the MCG Access Guide is available to all of you and has lots of great information about this. Microsoft has a good help page about making Word documents accessible to people with disabilities, and all that applies to exporting a PDF. And then Adobe has their own help site, PDF Accessibility Overview, that's very user-friendly as well. And that's it. Thanks for your time today.